So in my home, there may or may not be someone who has an issue with squirrels. At the front of my house, someone gifted us this. This person, whose initials are Tracy Ashley, thinks there has been a long-held conspiracy since around 1992 or 1993. A conspiracy of all the world's squirrels to get her. It's been a wide conspiracy covering lands from Stetson University in DeLand to Tallahassee to Fort Myers to the Tampa Bay, the greater Tampa Bay area. And they are all seemingly working together in, we've heard about the deep state. This might be the nut state, perhaps. Tracy has a little of an aversion and doesn't like squirrels because she thinks squirrels don't like her. But I was researching a little bit about squirrels this week, and squirrels are really good at storing nuts. And they're really good at saving for winter, and whatever kind of winter we have, where the nuts might be less available, and certainly in colder climates that is the case for sure. But it's pretty amazing. There's certain squirrels that will just gather all the nuts they can, and they store them at the base of a tree. And they're just piles and piles and piles. And they do that because they think this is a good place where I can protect my stash. There's other kinds of squirrels, other varieties, that they will go and they will actually sort the kind of nut and put each different type of nut in a different location. Pretty smart. So all the acorns go over here, all the walnuts go over here. If they have any almonds, they go over. Whatever the nuts are, they go in different locations to kind of diversify. And then there's some squirrels that will actually kind of, when they're storing their nuts, they'll be looking out for people around them. And they might even dig some fake holes, like, oh, Billy's looking at me over there. Let's just make him think that all the good nuts are going right down here. And then maybe sneaking away to hide them someplace else. And they seemingly have an amazing memory of where these things have been located so that they can get them when they need it in order to make it through the winter time. They're stewarding their work at certain times in the year in order to provide for other times of the year. But I did learn one other thing that they do. Well, that they don't do. They don't share. There's no sharing of nuts going on with the squirrels. What's theirs is theirs. And I mention this because for the next 4 weeks, we're going to be moving through a time of stewardship. We're going to be working in a series called Rooted in Grace, Growing in Generosity. We're working with the Florida United Methodist Foundation to test this series with them. And you may have received a letter here in the last day or two at your home. If you haven't, it will be coming. And just introducing you to the stewardship campaign and steward what we're going to be doing these next 4 weeks. We're going to be learning about different aspects of stewardship. You'll get a letter in the mail with a commitment card, and then on November 10th, we're all going to bring our commitment cards together, and we're going to offer them as an act of worship to the Lord. And what you commit and what I commit is just between us and the Lord. The church uses it simply to help gauge a budget. But these are commitments between you and the Lord. And you know what? Things change during the years, right? You retire, you might change jobs, you might relocate, you might move to a different home, and things change. So we're going to make commitments based on our best guess in the next month, but if things change, they change. It's no big deal. This commitment is between you and the Lord, and this is a step, as we're going to see, of discipleship for all of us. And when you get those letters in the mail, just hold on to them, be prayerful about them. These next 4 weeks will be learning about stewardship together and committing about our stewardship for the upcoming year. And then on November 10th, we'll celebrate and bring all of our envelopes and cards that day. But back to this story that Cody read for us. This is King David at near the end of his life. And you might remember King David wanted to build a temple for the Lord. But he was informed by the prophet Nathan that he would not be building this temple because of all the blood that was on his hand, all the wrongs he had done. He would not be the builder, but his son Solomon would be. So David is spending these last bits of his life attempting to prepare his son for this monumental task. David is gathering resources for the construction of the temple, emphasizing that the wealth and resources that Israel had were not of their own making, but were gifts from God. And in this story of David preparing for Solomon to build the temple and gathering all the supplies that were needed, all the gold and all the wood and all the gemstones and all the other kinds of precious metals, in doing that, we can find a couple of things that resonate with us about stewardship. First, stewardship is the responsible management of resources. It includes gifts and blessings entrusted to us by God. It could be our time, it could be our talents of what we are good at, it could be our treasures, meaning our maybe financial resources, and it is all of creation as well. So it's this responsible management of God's resources. It's not just about giving money, but using all that God has given us. Again, our time, our talents, our influence, our relationships. And at its core, stewardship is about managing what God has entrusted us to do. Just like Eli had entrusted me to manage Chase and take care of Chase. God has given us the job to be caretakers of his abundant gifts and of our time, talents, and treasures. And in the United Methodist tradition, we recognize that this is done only because of God's grace. It's not merely about God letting us do this and including us, which is part of God's grace, but God giving us and empowering us to be able to be good caretakers, and then being able to inspire others to be good caretakers. And it's not merely about the amount that we give or the amount that we do, it's the spirit in which we do it. So if we reflect on this mandate, we actually go all the way back to Genesis 1, verses 26 through 28, where God gives us responsibility. It says this: Then God said, "Let us make humanity in our image to resemble us, so that they may take charge of the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky and the livestock and all the earth and all the crawling things on earth." And God created humanity in God's own image. In the divine image of God, he created them. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and master it. Take charge of the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky and everything crawling on the ground." And then God said, "I now give to you all the plants on the earth that yield seeds and all the trees whose fruit produces the seeds within it. This will be your food. To all the wildlife, to all the birds of the sky and everything crawling on the ground, to everything that breathes, I give all the green grasses for food." And that's what happened. And God saw that everything he had made, and it was supremely good. God tells us to take charge. That the word there has been translated so many different ways, and it's sometimes troubling. It's a word to rule over, to take dominion, is one of the translations you might have, to subdue, take charge, master, be responsible. That might be one of the best ones. To reign over, to govern. I particularly like the idea of taking care of, stewarding. That's, even though that's an older word, or being caretakers. Being caretakers of God's resources. And when we take care of it, when we steward, when we are responsible for it, we are doing it in the image of God, with all the gifts and all the graces and all the purpose that God gives us to care for all things, all creation, in the same way that God would care for them, with love and mercy and grace. And we need God's grace to do that, because as David goes through this time of preparation, we see stewardship in three very informative ways. First, stewardship is an act of worship. Stewardship is something we do. It acknowledges that God is the owner of everything. Psalm 24:1 says, "The earth is the Lord's and everything in it." Stewardship is an act of worship and trust, radical trust. It's a reflection of our relationship with God. It's frankly one of the most difficult parts of our relationship and our most difficult parts of our discipleship. For some reasons, as broken humans, of which I am king, seems like, it's difficult for us to relinquish our resources many times. So it's an act of worship and obedience and trust. And these massive amounts of gold and silver and other materials reflect the idea that worshiping God should be done with excellence. Not perfection, not opulence, but excellence. The very best that we can give to God. The very best with the resources we've been given that we can offer to God our worship. David and the people of Israel gave generously to build this temple, recognizing that everything belongs to God and should be used for God's glory. David's personal treasures of gold and silver, some researchers believe that it might be worth more than $5 billion in today's money of these resources that David gave. So stewardship is an act of worship. Secondly, stewardship is a spiritual discipline that we practice and we learn. Just like prayer and fasting, just like serving are essential to our spiritual growth, stewardship is the way we show our trust and dependence on God. When we give up something that we are stewarding, trusting that God will take it and use it for the glory of the kingdom. Through stewardship, we build integrity. We grow spiritually, and generosity changes us. It softens our hearts and makes us more like Christ. We're asked to handle the resources that God has entrusted to us with integrity, knowing that they don't belong to us, they belong to God. And David acknowledged this with great humility. He acknowledged that he and the people were not worthy or capable of giving anything of their own accord. He recognized that their ability to give generously was only possible by the grace of God himself. So stewardship is an act of worship. And we'll be practicing that act of worship this month as we contemplate and pray about what our commitment will be, and then on November 10th, we'll come forward and place this as an act of prayerful and joyful celebration, too, for what God has provided for us for the coming years. And it's a spiritual discipline that we practice over and over and over in order, just like an athlete will practice the skills needed to be a good athlete, we practice the skills needed to be a good disciple. And then lastly, stewardship keeps us on mission. Sometimes in businesses they talk about mission drift, right? You know, you've gotten involved in things that you aren't supposed to be involved with. Even the best companies, even companies like Apple, have at times had mission drift with products or ideas that they thought were the next big thing, and they never really panned out. All right? So it keeps us on mission, stewardship does. By using what God has given us, we participate in spreading his kingdom on earth, and it gives us a faithfulness to the mission. And David has showed us this willingness to gather the resources and to prepare the temple, showed a deep understanding of stewardship and faithfulness to God's plan. He would not see this temple be built, but he was focused, laser focused on doing everything he could do in his lifetime in order to help the next generation to build it. And with that, David prepared. He showed us what preparation looks like. He prepared for the temple years in advance, even though he knew he wouldn't see it. And this shows that we can play a crucial role in preparing the way for others that we may not see in our community, and in our neighborhood, or in our world, or people that are not here yet. Think about the people that in 1909 came together, not in this location, but came together in this community to form Clearview. At that point, it would have been Clearview Methodist Episcopal Church. 1909. And the various people that have led through different years, getting us to this point, that we're in the mid-50s, we came to this location. People like Joe's parents, that were Joe's parents. Joe's dad was part of the building committees and the trustees, and helped to garner this church and move this church. Eric's parents were involved with the church. Donnie's parents' involvement. Judy's mother. Probably missing people too, right? But they didn't know what was going to be happening here on October 2024. But they went about doing the preparations. They went about practicing the spiritual disciplines. They went about preparing faithfully for the future that was to come. And that's part of our calling as well. The second thing, other than stewardship is an act of worship and a spiritual discipline and keeps us on mission, the second thing that we need to really key in on this morning is that everything comes from God. There is nothing in this world that is not created by God. Therefore, when Eli lets me take care of Chase, Eli is the owner. Eli is the one in this picture has created Chase or gotten Chase. He's the owner of Chase, and he's giving me Chase to steward, to take care of. I am not the owner. I didn't make Chase. I didn't buy Chase. Eli's the owner. And he's entrusting me to care for this thing that he owns. James tells us in chapter 1, verse 17, that every good and perfect gift is from above. And everything that God gives us is a good and perfect gift. Everything comes from God. Because God gives us grace to provide. He gives us grace to empower us to take care of things. And he gives us grace to empower us to stay on mission and pass this stewardship on to others. And if we see everything as a gift, that changes how we use our resources. It creates a spark. It creates a spirit of generosity and freedom where we are no longer owners, but we are just caretakers. We are stewards. It highlights that every good gift in our lives, our homes and our health, our relationships, this community, originates from God. And when we truly grasp this, it transforms our understanding of ownership. I don't know about you, but in my life, in our lives, we often find ourselves clutching to our possessions tightly. Am I the only one? as if we were the ones who created them. As if we were the ones who gathered these things together. Our jobs, our families, our health, our time, our money, our stuff, right? You just drive around our community in different parts of the community that were built at different times of the century. And, well, as they say now, as the Generation Z says, back in the 1900s, okay? Back in the 1900s, so many years ago, whole different century. We can drive around here at all these homes that were built from 1950s to today, and we can see how our houses have gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. Somehow, your parents and your grandparents raised 3 or 4 kids in a 3-bedroom, 1 bath, or 1.5 bath with a carport, right? Somehow that worked. It wasn't 5 bedrooms, 3 baths, and 4,000 square feet for all those years. But our houses have grown, and our stuff to fill the houses have grown. We have so many toys now, they don't even fit in the garage. We have to go rent extra space in the storage units, which is one of the biggest industries in our country now. And sometimes you don't have, one is not enough, right? You got to get 2 storage units. Yet God, even though we do this so imperfectly, God still invites us to be stewards, to be caretakers. And when we do, we acknowledge that we are part of something bigger, a divine economy of generosity that reflects God's grace and love. And often when we fall into this mindset of ownership, believing that what we have belongs solely to us, we get critiqued by David's words of challenge that we are simply caretakers, not owners. So if everything is a gift, then how should we use it? Are we generous, or do we hold back? Are we using our gifts for God's kingdom or for ourselves? Our focus should be that stewardship is an act of worship. That stewardship is a spiritual discipline, a spiritual muscle for us to grow. And stewardship helps keep us on mission of what God wants us to do. So how do we steward our time and our talents, our resources for God's kingdom? The first thing, it's not about quantity. I don't even know if it's about quality. I think it's about our hearts. There was a time when this church, quantity was not real great. Amen? And some really amazing leaders helped us see us through a time. And now we're reaping the benefits of quantity not being such a big deal. It's still an important thing. We're still careful, but we can breathe a little bit easier. But it's even when we have enough, when we have surplus or we have scarcity, it's not about the quantity. It's about our hearts. Our hearts to see stewardship as an act of worship, to encourage us to recognize that, like David, our ability in everything we have comes from God. In giving, we offer back God's love that He has given to us. We grow in our discipleship through spiritual disciplines, and we're encouraged to consider how stewardship affects our everyday decisions, not just the things that we make decisions about here, but everything. It's not just a church thing. It's how we go about our day. It's how we take care of the world around us. It's how we take care of and steward our relationships. That's part of our spiritual growth. And lastly, our mission. David's mission late in life was to get the supplies needed to build this temple. And many of the people that David used to prepare this, including himself, would not see this temple be built. There's this old African proverb that says, plant trees that you will never sit beneath. And friends, that's much of what we're doing in our world as followers of Jesus, is we're planting seeds for trees that we won't sit underneath, but that our children and our children's children. Someday, Aaron's child is going to come back here, and this is the place where my mom grew up in church. This is the place where my parents came and my Gigi came. This is where we grew to love Christ and to love one another. Can you imagine that? 30 years from now that Aaron's coming back and pointing these things out, and then he can go, back in the day, our pumpkin patch. And you can tell some great big lie there where it's enormous amounts of pumpkins. But that's okay, because he was here when it was lifting those pumpkins off. So this helps us stay focused on our mission. Here's some things to think about. How are you using your gifts? How are you sharing your time with those in need? Or are you hoarding like a squirrel, not sharing your stash? How are you using your resources to serve God and others? Do you give back to God joyfully, or do you hold on to your resources with fear or reluctance? I do that sometimes. Especially when I know there might be a big expense coming. I'll fearfully hold on to a little bit just in case. Here's the big one. What does your calendar and your checkbook or your bank account balance or your line items say about what's important to you? That's a convicting one to me. Some things in my calendar and things that I get distracted doing that probably are not great things to be stewarding. And certainly if you looked at my checkbook, you probably would think that eating out is really an important purpose of my life, probably. So this next week, as we continue in this time of stewardship in these next 4 weeks, in fact, I want to ask you to reflect on, what is God asking of you? What is God asking of me? What is God asking of us in this area of stewardship, and how we care for God's provision for us? And I want to challenge us all to take a concrete step in growing that way. It's not just about money. This is not if you don't turn in a commitment card, the church is not going to close. And it's okay. But it's an act of worship for us to make our commitment, to make our covenant with God, understanding that things change. This is not written in blood. This is not quite the covenant that maybe Abraham had with God, where they would then settle it over a sacrifice of a goat. We're just offering, this is my best guess of what I think I can give to the church as an act of worship, as part of my discipleship, to keep us on mission. There's a story of this little girl. You probably have heard this one. Little girl was Hattie Mae Wyatt. Here's a picture of Hattie Mae. She was a 6-year-old girl who lived near Grace Baptist Church in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And back then, the Sunday school for children was very crowded, so the pastor, Pastor Conwell, told her that one day they would have a building big enough to allow everyone to attend Sunday school, because Hattie Mae was very worried that it was getting too crowded, and then she would get left out, and others would get left out of Sunday school. He said, when we get the money, we will build one building large enough to get all the children in. Well, 2 years later, little Hattie Mae died. And after the funeral, Hattie's mother gave the minister a little bag that she had found under her daughter's pillow. It contained 57 cents in change. That's what she had saved up. And alongside it was a note in her handwriting to help build a bigger church so more children can go to Sunday school. The minister changed all the money into pennies and offered each one for sale to the people in the congregation. He received $250 this way, and 54 of the pennies were given back. They didn't even keep the pennies. The $250 was itself changed into pennies and sold by the newly formed Wyatt Mite Society, like the widow's mite. In this way, her 57 cents has kept on multiplying all these years. 26 years later, on December 1912, in a talk entitled The History of the 57 Cents, Pastor Conwell shared the results of this little girl's 57-cent donation. It was now a church with a membership of over 5,000 people, a hospital where tens of thousands of people had been treated, 80,000 young people going through university, and 2,000 people going out to preach the gospel as ordained pastors. And all this happened because little Hattie Mae Wyatt invested her 57 cents. We might have 57 cents or $57 or $5,700. Whatever we have, it all comes to us from God, and it's our act of worship, it's our spiritual discipline, and it's our focus on mission to give back to God what God has entrusted us to take care of. So in closing, let us remember that stewardship is not just about money, it's about our hearts. It's about recognizing that everything we have is a gift from God. And when we are able to give generously, we reflect the very heart of our Creator. Stewardship is not about obligation, but about recognizing that everything we have is a gift from God. We don't have to give, we get to give. And then we are called to manage these gifts well. So as we embark on this journey of understanding stewardship together, let's embrace this call to give generously. Let's ask ourselves regularly, how can I use what God has given to me already the way God would use it? Amen?